It's my daughter's first day back to school after the holiday, but we're having a snow event, and so they've delayed opening of school. So I had planned on mixing some bread later in the day, but now I've got an extra hour or so. So I figured I would mix up the bread recipe this morning, and then maybe later today I can come back on and go live again and show you the bread after it's risen and do some pre-shaping and shaping. So we're going to mix up the beginner bread recipe, level 2, with increased hydration. So we're going to start with 200 grams of active starter. I've got 2 starters. And they are set up to discard 120 grams out of each starter because that's what the base is for the beginner bread recipe. So since I need 200 grams today, I'm going to take 100 from each of my starter, and then after I mix this, I'll show you how to refeed it. So we're just going to tear our scale to 0 and get 100 grams from this starter into our bowl. My starter is really thick. This one has just recently peaked, so it's still quite thick. It hasn't eaten through all of its flour yet, whereas this one is past peak, so it's already gone up and started to fall down, but that's okay because past peak starters give us a little bit more flavor. So the beginner bread recipe that we recommend people start with is lower hydration and much easier to manage. And it is 120 grams of active starter, 680 grams of water, 1,000 grams of flour, and 20 grams of salt. When we increase the hydration from the beginner bread recipe, we go up to 200 grams of starter and 700 grams of water, and then still the same 1,000 grams of flour and 20 grams of salt. So we've got 200 grams of starter. So now, just to keep it simple, I'm going to just pour in my water, blend it up, then add my flour and salt. So I don't know if you've already followed the channel or if you've been following along in the Facebook group Sourdough for Beginners, or maybe you own my ebook called Decoding Sourdough Essentials. It's linked in the description. It's on Etsy. But essentially, my philosophy is that sourdough can be easy for beginners. Anyone can do it. And there's a very basic set of essential processes. And you should start with those, practice them, get the techniques mastered and down, and then you can start to add more advanced processes. So I'm going to add 700 grams of water here. So for me, the basic essential processes are have an active starter, mix my dough without any special techniques, stretch it and fold it 3 or 4 times, put it into a bulk proofing container and let it rise to approximately double, pre-shape it, shape it, give it a functional score, and bake it. Any of the other processes out there, in my opinion, are optional. They're valid and you should use them, but do you need to create a levain the night before? No, I don't think so. Do you need to do anything other than basic stretch and folds like coil folds or anything like that? No. Do you need to auto-lease your flour? No. All of these things can help your dough and can make things better, but when you're a beginner, just to prevent confusion, I like to try and keep it simple. So right now I'm just taking my active starter and blending it into my water. I just use a regular whisk, and I'm just going to let it dissolve until it creates like a milky substance. So there we go, foamy and milky. So now I'm going to add 1,000 grams of flour, and you can use any blend you like. I usually stay around 800 grams of regular all-purpose flour and about 200 grams of a sturdier flour. Today I'm going to use spelt. I really like the way spelt tastes. My personal favorite loaves are the ones that have a little bit of spelt in them. My kids want me to always just only do 100% white loaves. So this is just regular, inexpensive, all-purpose flour from Walmart, and I'm going to add about 800 grams. So I just kind of let it float on top of the starter mixture. And the way I'm doing the recipe today, this is going to make two loaves that are just over 900 grams each. But if you only want one loaf, you can just split it in half right down the middle. So now I'm going to add 200 grams or so. I'm at 797, so I'm just going to take myself up to 1,000 grams with this felt flour. Same thing, I just kind of spread it over top. You could blend this before you mix it in, but the whole point of our philosophy is no extra steps. Just keep it nice and simple. So there we go, 1,000 grams. And now I'm just going to tare my scale back to 0 and add 20 grams of salt. Okay. So now what I do is I start with my spoon and I just sort of blend everything I've just put in on top of the liquid. And then I start mixing the flour and salt into the starter water mixture until it becomes thick enough that the spoon can't really do anything anymore. And then I finish it with my hand. So as you can see, as long as you have an active starter, mixing your dough is fairly simple. All we're trying to do with this initial mix is get as much of the flour as we can absorbed and create a shaggy dough. It'll look lumpy and bumpy and messy, but the stretching and folding process that comes after this will smooth it out and strengthen up the dough as we go. You sometimes really got to use your muscles for this part. So one of the questions, one of the things we always see, so if you're not aware, we have a group on Facebook. It's called Sourdough for Beginners. I think we're at 275,000 members now. It's a place where newbies can go and, post pictures of their first loaves and get some encouragement, but also to learn. And we've set up a whole set of tutorials. So the admin and moderator team and I can go onto these posts that people make and paste these tutorials that we've set up to them. So it's I've got questions about my starter. This isn't working, or I don't know which recipe to start with, or my bread didn't rise, or why is it so dense, or how come the bottom of my bread is so hard. And slowly over time, we've built up enough tutorials. They're linked in the channel, on the Facebook page, in the description of this, that we're really able to help beginners as they go. And one of the things that we see is, I've been in lots of other groups and I've been learning online, and why are you using plastic for your starter? And I heard you weren't supposed to use metal. And what's another really common one? I got the lid on my starter loose. Why is yours sealed? And excuse me. In most cases, we think that these rules that circulate out there now started as best practices or recommendations that for ways to make your sourdough better, but seeing those things as a rule that could actually ruin your sourdough, we believe that they're myths. So I use the most basic of tools. When I started, I was a newbie too. I wasn't in a position to go and buy all of the tools that you possibly could have. So I just started with what I had. I reused deli containers for my starter. I used a metal bowl. I used a metal whisk. I used a metal knife for stirring. And, so far it's all going well for me. And in most cases, I've tried to look up to see if there's any scientific reason not to use those things and haven't really found any. Okay, so we're mixed. It's very shaggy and lumpy. And if you were to be able to inspect it closely, you'd probably find little bits of flour here and there that aren't fully mixed in. But what's going to happen is as the process goes on, we're going to stretch and fold, and that's going to both continue mixing the dough further as well as build strength. So what I always do is once my dough is mixed, I push it aside, and then I refeed my starters so that they're ready again. So an interesting question that I hadn't really seen a lot of before, but that I'm starting to see quite a bit is, do I feed my starter after I use it, even if I just fed it 4 or 8 hours ago? The reality is you can feed your starter anytime you want. You can feed it twice a day. You can feed it right after you use it. My thing is that I always just maintain a certain amount in my starter so that they're always kind of ready to go, and that they've just got lots to eat. So I took 100 out, so I'm going to add 50 grams each of flour and water back in. So all I'm going to do is just pour in the flour. It doesn't have to be accurate or perfect. And then just going to stir it up. So what are the benefits of a slightly higher hydration loaf, and what are the benefits of a lower hydration loaf? We always recommend that beginners start with our beginner bread recipe. It's pinned at the top of the YouTube channel. It's lower hydration, less water. It's a denser, heavier dough, but it's less sticky. It's easier to work with. It rises a little slower, a little bit more consistently. And it's just much easier to manage for hands that aren't used to the way the dough is supposed to feel, and has a higher chance of success. But once you've mastered it, what you'll find is that the loaf it creates can be quite a bit denser than maybe what you were hoping for. So increasing your hydration gives you the opportunity for, a thinner, more crispy loaf on the outside and more bubbles on the inside. So increasing the hydration might give you a nicer loaf, but it's much harder to work with. So let's just add some flour and water to this starter. Great. So if you're going to be baking lots, then you can store your starter on the counter in a warm place. If you're not baking very frequently, you can store your starter in the fridge. What I usually do lately is I've been baking once every 3 or 4 days. Is I'll feed my starter like this, and then I will let it rise on the counter to peak, and then I stick it in the fridge. And I find that in most cases, it just stays at peak in the fridge. That's a new little experiment that I did. But the one thing that I know for sure about sourdough and about starters is that one specific technique doesn't really change anything overly significantly, other than perhaps making it easier or harder for you. So if you want, you can just keep a small amount of starter in the fridge, and then when you want to bake, bring it out, feed it the amount that you're going to need for your starter for the recipe that you're using. You can keep your starter just fed on the counter and feed it every day so that it's almost always ready to go. You want to try to aim to use your starter when it's at peak, so when it's kind of gotten to double and beyond as far as it's normally going to go. But it might be wasteful to be feeding it every single day if you're not going to be using it, and storing it in the fridge will just slow down that eating process that it has, so that you can use less flour in feeding it. So I just keep my starters beside the stove. It's nice and warm there as I cook through the day, whether the burners are on or the oven's on, just sort of helps them rise. Putting a starter inside the oven with the light on scares me unless your oven has one of those locking options. I've just seen so many cooked starters, and I'm just afraid that, you could forget and turn it on yourself, or someone in your family doesn't know that it's in there and your starter gets cooked. So I recommend just the warmest spot in your kitchen. And if your environment is still too cold, then there's like wraps that you can get that'll go around your jar that plug in, that keep and maintain a steady temperature. So with the dough, and I often do this when I'm on live. Normally, what would happen, this is mixed now. It's 200 grams of starter, 700 grams of water, 1,000 grams of flour, and 20 grams of salt. Normally, what I would do is I would let it sit for 30 minutes, and then I would stretch and fold and then sit for 30 minutes, stretch and fold, sit for 30 minutes, stretch and fold, 3 or 4. So sometimes after that third one, I'll stop. Sometimes I'll do one more. But since we're live and since you've sort of watched it get mixed up, what I'm going to do is just a quick stretch and fold. So we just get our hand wet, we reach underneath our dough, we pull straight up, and we pull over. And if you watch this dough right now, as I lift it, it's actually tearing, right? What you'll notice as you stretch and fold is after each stretch and fold, the dough gets a little bit stronger. In fact, even during one stretch and fold, the dough will get stronger. So if you look right now, this dough is doing a lot less stretching. It's coming up a lot less, and it's also starting to rip less. So that's the point of stretching and folding. With regular bread, normally you would knead it, but sourdough is too sticky to knead. So this is just a gentler way to build some strength in. So I'm going to go get ready to take my daughter to school soon. I'm going to finish stretching and folding this dough, and then later this afternoon, I'm going to get it into my clear, straight-sided proofing containers, which there's a video about that on the YouTube channel as well. And then later today, once the dough is risen, I'll try to pop back on live and do a pre-shape and a shape to get ready to bake. Okay, talk to you later, guys.